August 17, 1571. The city of Famagusta, Cyprus. The Ottoman soldiers had promised safe passage. They signed the agreement 12 days earlier. The garrison would surrender with honor. The commander and his men would leave unmolested. This was the deal. This was the word of Lala Kara Mustafa Pasha, commander of the Ottoman siege army. The promise lasted 4 days. On August 17, Venetian commander Marcantonio Bragadin is standing in the main square of a city he has just surrendered. He is 53 years old. He has held Famagusta for 11 months against an Ottoman army of 200,000. He is the reason half those soldiers are dead. He is the reason the Ottoman campaign for Cyprus took a year instead of a week. None of this matters now. Ottoman soldiers step forward. They cut off his right ear, and his left ear, and his nose. They keep him conscious throughout. This is deliberate. This is the first act of the plan. It gets worse. For the next 2 weeks, Bragadin is led daily through the streets. He carries sacks of earth and stone to the city's fortifications. He has to kiss the ground every time he passes beneath the Ottoman flag. A noose hangs above him at each station, low enough to force him to bow his head under it. The surviving Venetian and Cypriot soldiers watch from their positions. Some of them have families in the city. They watch their commander carrying dirt in his arms through streets they once defended. On August 17, they chain Bragadin to a column in the square, in full view of the population, in full view of his soldiers. A man with a knife begins the work. The flaying takes 45 minutes. Bragadin does not beg. By every account that survives, he spends his final minutes reciting the 51st Psalm. He dies somewhere in the middle of it. The Ottoman soldiers finish their work anyway. They stuff his skin with straw. They dress it in his military uniform. They attach it to the prow of Mustafa Pasha's flagship. Here is what you need to understand. This was not an atrocity committed in rage. This was a statement. A precise, calculated, deliberate statement directed at every Christian power in the Mediterranean. And the statement was this: resistance has a price. Surrender has a price. Existence in this sea has a price, and the Ottoman Empire decides what that price is. For 120 years before this moment, that statement had been completely correct. Think about what 120 years actually means. That is your entire family history 4 generations back. Every single person who raised you, and every person who raised them, living and dying inside a single unbroken military fact. Constantinople fell in 1453, before Columbus reached America, before the printing press transformed Europe, before Leonardo da Vinci painted The Last Supper. In the 120 years between Constantinople falling and this morning in Famagusta, the Ottoman Empire fought 17 major naval engagements in the eastern Mediterranean. They won 16 of them. That number is not a statistic. That number is a civilization's entire military memory. Every admiral who commanded Christian ships in that century grew up knowing the Ottomans had won 16 of 17. Every sailor who shipped out of Venice or Genoa knew the odds before he left the harbor. Every coastal village from Sicily to Greece had buried people taken in Ottoman raids and knew exactly who owned the sea they lived beside. And it gets worse than that. 120 years of expansion without reversal means something specific about how the expanding power thinks. It stops planning for failure. It stops modeling scenarios where the enemy fights back effectively. It stops asking whether the next campaign might be different, because the next campaign has never been different. Not once, not in 4 generations of warfare. This is the trap, not a military trap, a psychological one. And by the summer of 1571, the Ottoman Empire had been walking into it for decades without knowing it existed. Here is the world as it stands in July of 1571. The Ottoman Empire controls 3,000 miles of Mediterranean coastline, from Morocco to the borders of Persia. Every major port, every trade route, every island that matters strategically in the eastern Mediterranean. Their standing fleet is 250 galleys. Their sailors and soldiers number more than 80,000. Their shipbuilding program can replace an entire destroyed fleet within 18 months. They had done it before, and their plan is not a secret. Cyprus is not an endpoint. After Cyprus comes Crete. After Crete comes Malta. After Malta comes Sicily. After Sicily comes the Italian coast. Ottoman military correspondence from 1571 makes the sequence explicit. This is not the next step in an improvised campaign. This is the conclusion of a plan 120 years in the making. 5 people understand exactly how close the edge actually is. The first is Marcantonio Brigadin. He understood it 11 months earlier, when the Ottoman siege army first appeared outside Famagusta. He understood it in the final weeks, when the walls were rubble and the garrison was dying from wounds and disease and starvation. He chose to fight anyway, not because he believed he could win, because he understood that every day Famagusta held was one more day the rest of the Mediterranean had to prepare. He paid for that calculation with 45 minutes and his own skin. And what he bought with that time is the reason this story exists. The second person is Pope Pius V, a 77-year-old Dominican friar who had been pope for 5 years and was spending those 5 years losing a war he could not convince anyone else was real. He was nearly blind by 1571. He had months to live. He had been writing letters since 1568, and those letters said the same thing every time. The Ottoman fleet is coming west. This is not a regional crisis. This is an existential one. The letters came back with polite acknowledgments and careful vagueness and reasons why this particular year was not quite the right moment to commit. Pius V feared one thing above everything else. Not death, not defeat in battle. He feared watching the Mediterranean become an Ottoman lake while he was still breathing and capable of understanding what he had failed to prevent. He feared that the generation after him would grow up in a world where the sea between Europe and Africa was owned by a single power. And that power's relationship to Christianity was not peaceful coexistence. It was the skin of brigading on a flagship, and this is the part that history never explains properly. 3 years of letters failed to build the alliance. One skin stuffed with straw sailing into Constantinople succeeded. The moral outrage that diplomatic correspondence could not produce, one public act of deliberate humiliation created in weeks. The Holy League that Pius V had been begging into existence since 1568 finally signed its alliance on July 25, 1571, 43 days before the battle. The third person is Don John of Austria, 24 years old, the illegitimate son of the dead Emperor Charles, the fifth half-brother to King Philip II of Spain. He had no dynasty to inherit, no title to pass on, no commercial empire to protect. What he had was this: the knowledge that he was the most capable military commander available to the Christian alliance, and the equally uncomfortable knowledge that no one with actual power accepted that assessment yet. He feared one thing: that the defining battle of his generation would happen before he could reach it. And so he maneuvered. He called in every favor available to a man with royal blood and no formal standing. He pushed through courts that found him difficult and kings who found him presumptuous. He needed one engagement, one proof. He was about to get it in 43 days. The fourth voice has no names in the historical record. It belongs to 12,000 men listed in Ottoman naval ledgers as rowing capacity. 12,000 Christian galley slaves chained below the waterline in the Ottoman fleet. Some had been in those chains for a decade. Some were soldiers captured in earlier campaigns. Some were civilians taken in coastal raids on Italian and Spanish villages. Some were fishermen who had been in the wrong water at the wrong hour of the wrong morning. They were not afraid of dying. A decade of chains removes the fear of death. They were afraid of something smaller and more precise. They were afraid that no one was coming, that the people on the shore had calculated the odds, found the odds unfavorable, and made their peace with leaving 12,000 men below the waterline of the Ottoman fleet forever. This fear was reasonable. It had been reasonable every year for the previous decade. Nothing in the record of the Christian powers suggested it was wrong. And the fifth voice is Ali Pasha, the Ottoman fleet admiral, a commander without a naval defeat on his record, a man who had received explicit assurances from Sultan Selim, the second himself, that the Christian coalition would not fight, that they would see the Ottoman fleet, calculate the odds, and negotiate, because that was what Christian forces did when the odds were overwhelming, because 120 years said so. Ali Pasha feared nothing. He had no reason to. Every fact available to him supported his confidence. This is the part that historians argue about the least, because it is the clearest. The most dangerous certainty in the world is not ignorance. It is a belief that has been correct for 120 years. Because when it finally becomes wrong, the man who holds it is always the last person to know. And by the time he learns the truth, the fleet is already burning. Ali Pasha had 43 days left to act on what he was certain he knew. He would use every one of them to sail directly toward the thing he could not see coming. May 24, 1571. Rome. Pope Pius V is dying. He is 77 years old. His eyesight is failing. He is trying to build a military alliance that goes against every political reality of the 16th century. He needs Spain. He needs Venice. He needs Genoa. And they despise each other. Venice is a merchant republic. They care about trade. They care about gold. The Ottoman Empire is their biggest trading partner. Spain is a global empire. They care about controlling the Western Mediterranean and fighting Protestants in Northern Europe. Genoa is a banking power. They care about whatever makes their rival, Venice, weaker. They are supposed to unite to save Christendom. Instead, they are secretly trying to destroy each other. But that is not what broke the alliance before it even started. Here's how the negotiations actually work. The Pope calls a meeting in Rome. The Spanish ambassador arrives with instructions from King Philip II. The instructions say Spain will provide half the ships, but only if the fleet attacks North Africa. The Venetian ambassador arrives with instructions from the Doge. The instructions say Venice will provide the other half, but only if the fleet defends Cyprus. They argue for weeks. While they argue, the Ottoman fleet leaves the Dardanelles. This is where it hits the population of Venice. Cyprus is already burning. 40,000 Venetians and Cypriots have been killed or captured since the siege of Famagusta began. The Venetian treasury is bleeding thousands of ducats a day. Merchant ships sit empty in the harbor. Trade with the East has collapsed. The people of Venice are not fighting an ideological war. They are facing absolute economic ruin. Every day the diplomats in Rome argue, another Venetian family goes bankrupt. And the men in Rome know this. The Spanish know exactly how desperate Venice is. Some people got protection. Others got silence. Spain uses the Venetian desperation as leverage. They drag out the negotiations. They refuse to commit. King Philip II calculates that a weakened Venice is good for Spain. Let the Ottomans bleed the Venetians for another month. Let them beg. This is the reality of the Holy League. It is not a brotherhood of faith. It is a hostage negotiation between allies. And that was just the beginning. By June, Venice is secretly negotiating a separate peace with Constantinople behind the Pope's back. They send an envoy to the Ottoman Grand Vizier. They offer to surrender Cyprus completely. They offer to pay a massive war indemnity. They offer anything to stop the bleeding. The Ottomans refuse. They know they do not need to negotiate. They already have the sea. This forces Venice back to the table in Rome, completely humiliated, completely out of options. On July 25, they finally sign the treaty. The Holy League is formed. They agree to assemble a fleet of 200 galleys. They agree to share the costs. They agree to fight. But this decision guaranteed what came next, because signing a piece of paper in Rome has not put ships in the water. The fleet has to assemble in Messina, Sicily. The Venetians arrive early. The Spanish arrive late. The Genoese arrive angry. And when they finally look at each other across the harbor in Messina, the alliance immediately falls apart again. Explain how it actually happened. The Venetian ships are fast, but they are undermanned. A plague hit Venice that spring. They do not have enough soldiers to row the galleys or fight on the decks. The Spanish ships are heavy. They are packed with the best infantry in Europe. But the Spanish commander, Gian Andrea Doria, looks at the Venetian galleys and laughs. He tells the Venetian commander, Sebastiano Venier, that his ships are floating coffins. Venier is a 75-year-old veteran. He does not take insults from Genoese mercenaries working for Spain. He threatens to pull the Venetian fleet out of the harbor and sail home. This is late August. The Ottoman fleet is already raiding the Adriatic coast. They are burning Venetian territories in Dalmatia. They are closing in. And the Christian commanders are threatening to kill each other in Sicily. Who paid for this delay? The coastal populations of the Adriatic. While the admirals argued over protocol and pride, Ottoman corsairs raided unchecked. Entire villages were emptied. Thousands of men, women, and children were taken as slaves. They were loaded onto Ottoman galleys to replace rowers who had died of exhaustion. The cost of diplomatic vanity was paid in human beings. The admirals in Messina escaped the consequences. The villagers in Dalmatia paid the bill. This mistake didn't show up for years. But it almost ended the war before the first shot was fired. The Holy League needs a commander. Someone who can force these men to sail in the same direction. The Pope demands it. Spain demands it. And they choose a 24-year-old boy. His name is Don John of Austria. He is the illegitimate son of the former Emperor Charles V. He is King Philip's half-brother. He is young. He is charismatic. He has royal blood. He has never commanded a fleet in his life. When Don John arrives in Messina in late August, the situation is completely toxic. The Venetians hate the Spanish. The Spanish distrust the Venetians. The Genoese hate everyone. Don John has to build a functioning navy out of a political disaster. He makes one decision that changes the entire trajectory of the campaign. He orders Spanish and German infantry to board the empty Venetian galleys. He physically mixes the forces. A Venetian captain now commands Spanish soldiers. A Genoese galley now carries German mercenaries. He forces them to rely on each other. If the ship sinks, they all drown together. It is a brilliant tactical move. It is also an incredibly dangerous gamble, because the hatred between these men is real. It gets worse. In early September, the fleet finally leaves Messina. They sail east toward Greece. They stop at the port of Gomeniza to resupply. A fight breaks out on one of the Venetian galleys. A Spanish captain insults a Venetian sailor. The sailor strikes back. The Spanish infantry draw their weapons. The Venetian crew draws theirs. Within minutes, a riot spreads across the ship. Sebastiano Venier, the Venetian commander, sees the riot. He sends his officers to stop it. The Spanish soldiers attack the officers. Venier loses his mind. He orders his flagship to pull alongside the rioting galley. He has the Spanish captain arrested. And without consulting Don John, without a trial, without any warning, he hangs the Spanish captain from the yardarm. A Spanish officer, hanged by a Venetian commander. In the middle of the Holy League fleet, Don John is furious. He is the supreme commander. Venier has openly defied him. The Spanish officers demand Venier's head. They demand that the Venetian flagship be fired upon. They want to start the war right there, against their own allies. For 2 hours, the Christian fleet is on the edge of destroying itself. Don John has to make a choice. Execute Venier and lose the Venetian fleet, or do nothing and lose the respect of his Spanish soldiers. He does the only thing that keeps the fleet alive. He banishes Venier from the command councils. He refuses to speak to him. He communicates with the Venetians through a subordinate. He swallows his pride to keep the ships moving east. This is the fragility of the Holy League. It is held together by spit and wire and the desperate maneuvering of a 24-year-old. And then a ship arrives from the east. It brings the news from Famagusta. It brings the story of Marcantonio Bragadin, the surrender, the betrayal, the mutilation, the flaying. The news spreads through the fleet in hours. The arguments stop. The national rivalries evaporate. The Spanish infantry stop insulting the Venetian sailors. The Genoese commanders stop complaining about their positions. The skin of Marcantonio Bragadin did what the Pope could not do. It unified the Holy League. It showed every man in that fleet exactly what was waiting for them if they lost. It replaced political calculation with absolute, primal clarity. And this changed everything that came after. Because on October 4th, the Christian fleet rounds the coast of Greece. They enter the Ionian Sea, and they finally learn where the Ottoman fleet is anchored. They are in the Gulf of Patras, near a town called Lepanto. The Holy League is 80 miles away. They have 212 ships. They are sailing into waters the Ottomans have controlled for a century. They are sailing toward an enemy that has never been broken. And they are running out of time. October 6th, 1571. 11 o'clock at night. The Gulf of Patras, Greece. Don John of Austria cannot sleep. He is 24 years old. He is lying in his cabin on the flagship Real. Tomorrow morning he will command the largest Christian fleet ever assembled, against the largest Islamic fleet in the history of the Mediterranean. He has 40,000 men depending on his decisions. He has the fragile, fractious, mutually hostile alliance of 3 rival powers depending on his nerve. He has never commanded a naval battle in his life. At midnight, scouts arrive. The Ottoman fleet has been located. 251 galleys. Anchored at the eastern end of the Gulf of Patras, near the port of Lepanto. The distance between the two fleets is approximately 80 miles. At sailing speed, that is less than 8 hours. The battle will happen in the morning, whether Don John is ready or not. And here is the decision that changes everything. Not the tactics, not the formations. One decision, made quietly in a cabin in the middle of the night by a 24-year-old who had no right to be in command of anything. He orders the galley beaks cut off. This needs explaining. Every war galley in the Mediterranean was built with a long iron beak on the prow. A ram. The entire doctrine of galley warfare for 2,000 years was built around that ram. You row at the enemy. You strike their hull below the waterline. You sink them or disable them before the soldiers board. The ram also blocked the forward cannon. The cannon on the prow could not fire straight ahead because the beak was in the way. So in standard doctrine, cannon were secondary. Impact was primary. Don John orders every beak on every Christian galley sawed off. Tonight, in the dark, before the battle. It takes carpenters 3 hours to work through the fleet. When they are done, 212 Christian galleys have open, unobstructed cannon ports at their prows. They can fire directly forward from the first moment of engagement. They no longer need to close to ramming distance to inflict damage. They can kill at range. The Ottomans will not know this until it is too late. But that was not even the most important decision. 6 weeks earlier, in Messina, the Venetian naval architects had presented something the Mediterranean had never seen. They called them galleasses, giant ships. Warships twice the size of a standard galley, packed with heavy cannon on every side, front, back, both flanks. They were not fast. They could not ram. They could not maneuver quickly, but they did not need to. They were floating fortresses. They were designed to sit in one place and destroy everything around them. Don John had placed them at the front of the battle line, 3 on the left flank, 3 on the right, far ahead of the main formation. Far enough that the Ottoman oarsmen would have to row directly through their fire before the 2 main lines even made contact. The Ottoman fleet had never encountered them. The Ottoman tactical doctrine had no counter for them. There was no document in Ali Pasha's command tent that explained what to do when you row your 500-man galley into the broadside of a fortress that is firing 40 cannon simultaneously. The Ottoman commanders who learned about the galleasses during the battle learned about them from the inside. Here is what the morning looks like from the water. October 7th, 5:30 in the morning. The Christian fleet begins moving east, 212 galleys in formation. The 6 galleasses pushed far ahead on their flanks, like enormous dogs on long leashes. The dawn light is gray and flat. The sea is calm. There is almost no wind. No wind is a problem. Galleys can row regardless of wind. Sailing ships cannot move without it. The Christian fleet has some sailing ships mixed with the galleys. Without wind, they are dead weight. Without wind, the Ottoman oarsmen can drive their galleys at full speed, and the Christians cannot use every ship they have. Then, at approximately 7 in the morning, the wind shifts. It comes from the west, from behind the Christian fleet, straight into the face of the Ottoman oarsmen. The same wind that had been helping the Ottomans approach is now directly in their eyes. It carries the smoke from the Christian cooking fires. It carries the spray. It forces the Ottoman rowers to row harder into resistance, while the Christian sails fill and drive their formation forward without effort. Men who witnessed this wrote later that it felt like an act of God. Don John believed it was. He had spent the previous night on his knees. He had ordered prayers across the entire fleet at dawn. Every man in the Christian formation, 200,000 pounds of armed soldiers on 200 galleys, had prayed together before the battle. The wind shift felt like an answer. Ali Pasha, watching from his flagship, the Sultana, saw the same wind and drew a different conclusion. He could not stop now. He had 251 galleys behind him, 40,000 soldiers and sailors who believed in the invincibility of the Ottoman fleet. A sultan in Constantinople who had told him the Christians would not fight. He could not turn around. He could not reposition. The wind was against him, but the Ottoman Empire did not turn around because of wind. He pressed forward. This decision guaranteed what came next. Before the lines closed, Don John did something that no Christian commander of his era had ever done. He ordered a small rowing boat brought alongside his flagship. He climbed into it alone. He was rowed along the entire length of the Christian battle line, from the far left flank to the far right flank. Every ship, every crew, every soldier standing at their battle stations in the early morning light. He stood in the boat and raised his arms. The men who saw him described it afterward in letters home. Their commander, in gilded armor, standing in a small boat between the 2 greatest fleets in the world, riding the length of the line with his arms raised, as if he were claiming the water beneath him. The men on the ships roared back, not because he gave a speech. He gave no speech that history recorded. They roared because a 24-year-old boy with no battle history had showed up in person, between the 2 fleets, alone in a small boat, refusing to look afraid. Military fear is contagious, but so is military courage, and it gets worse for the Ottomans. Miguel de Cervantes is 24 years old. He is stationed on a galley called the Marquesa, on the left flank of the Christian formation. He has a fever. He has been sick for 3 days. His commanding officer finds him that morning in the below-decks area, sweating through his uniform, unable to stand steadily. The officer tells him to stay below. He is in no condition to fight. He is a liability on deck. Cervantes refuses. He tells his commanding officer that he would rather die fighting for God and the king than hide below decks in safety. These are approximately his exact words, recorded decades later in his own writing. He is allowed to take his battle station. Within the first hour of fighting, he takes 2 arquebus shots to the chest. The third shot destroys his left hand permanently. He will spend the rest of his life writing with his right. He will write Don Quixote from a prison cell 30 years later. He will describe the Battle of Lepanto as the most beautiful event any man could have witnessed in any age. He never fully explains what he means by beautiful. But the men who stood on those decks in the morning light, watching the wind shift, watching the 6 galleasses pushed out ahead like a wall, watching the Ottoman fleet come on regardless, knowing the mathematics of what was about to happen, those men understood it. Beauty is not the absence of violence. Sometimes beauty is the precise moment when everything aligns. The right wind, the right weapon, the right decision made in the dark the night before, the right man standing in a small boat between 2 fleets, refusing to show fear. They had one chance, one morning, one formation, one set of weapons the enemy had never seen. If it worked, history changed. If it failed, Europe's coast was next. Here is what the Ottoman formation looks like from the Christian ships. 251 galleys coming east to west. Ali Pasha's center is massive. 91 galleys packed tightly together. His own flagship, the Sultana, at the center, flying the banner of the Prophet. On his right flank, Mehmed Sirocco, governor of Alexandria, with 56 galleys, crowding close to the northern shore, trying to use shallow water as a barrier on his flank. On his left, the Corsair commander Ulus Ali, with 63 galleys, the most experienced sea fighter in the Ottoman fleet, the one commander who actually understands what flexible naval warfare requires. The 2 formations are closing toward each other. The galleasses are now visible from the Ottoman fleet. They are enormous. Nothing in any Ottoman tactical manual describes them. The Ottoman captains who see them first do not know what they are. They are about to learn. And the 12,000 Christian galley slaves, chained below the waterline of the Ottoman ships, hear the change in the rowing rhythm above them. They feel the tension in the hull as it drives forward at battle speed. They have no information. They have no weapons. They have nothing but chains and darkness and the sounds filtering down from above. Some of them have been in those chains for 10 years. They do not know that the fleet closing on their ship from the west is different from every fleet the Ottomans have defeated before. They do not know about the galleasses. They do not know about the cutbeaks. They do not know about the wind. They know only one thing. The pace of the oars above them is changing. The ship is accelerating. Something is happening on the water that is different from everything before it. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the 2 fleets are close enough to see each other's faces. The galleasses open fire. 10 o'clock in the morning, October 7th, 1571. The Gulf of Patras. The galleasses open fire. Here is what that means in human terms. Each galleass carries between 40 and 50 heavy cannon. 6 galleasses positioned ahead of the Christian line. That is 240 cannon firing simultaneously into the front of the Ottoman advance formation before a single Ottoman soldier can reach a Christian deck. The Ottoman galleys are packed tightly together. This is standard formation. Tight formation means coordinated boarding. Tight formation means concentrated force when the lines collide. Tight formation had worked 16 times out of 17 against every enemy the Ottomans had ever faced. Tight formation means when a heavy cannon round hits the front galley, the debris does not fall into open water. It falls into the next galley behind it. The Ottoman front line disintegrates in minutes. Men who survived wrote that the noise alone was unlike anything ever heard on Mediterranean water. Not individual cannon fire. Simultaneous broadside from 6 floating fortresses, repeated every 3 to 4 minutes as the crews reloaded. The Ottoman oarsmen who were rowing at full battle speed when the galleasses opened fire did not have time to slow down. They rowed directly into the kill zone before their commanders could redirect them. Dozens of Ottoman galleys are holed, burning, or sinking before the main lines make contact. But that is not what decides the battle. The main Ottoman formation is still largely intact behind the wreckage of the advance. 230 galleys still rowing forward. Ali Pasha on the Sultana at the center. Mehmed Sirocco on the Ottoman right, pushing close to the northern shoreline. Ulyuj Ali on the Ottoman left, watching, waiting, calculating. The two main lines close the distance. At approximately 10:15, they collide. What happens next is not one battle. It is three separate engagements happening simultaneously across several miles of water, each with its own momentum, its own crisis, and its own turning point. Understanding Lepanto means understanding all three at once. On the northern flank, the Ottoman right under Mehmed Sirocco presses close to the shallow water of the shoreline. This is deliberate. He wants to prevent the Christian left flank from outflanking him. He wants the shore as a wall on his right side. What he does not know is that the Venetian galleys on the Christian left are flat-bottomed. They can operate in shallow water that would ground an Ottoman galley. The Christian left commander is Agostino Bavarigo. He sees what Sirocco is doing. He pushes his galleys even closer to the shore, cutting off Sirocco's escape route to the north, boxing him against the coastline he thought would protect him. This decision costs Barbarigo his life within the hour. An Ottoman archer fires from close range as the lines make contact on the northern flank. The arrow finds the gap between Barbarigo's helmet and his visor. It enters his eye. He does not die immediately. He is carried below decks, still breathing, still giving orders through the pain. He dies later that afternoon, after learning his flank is held. He does not die knowing whether the center held, because in the center, the situation is different from anything happening on the flanks, and it will determine everything. Don John's flagship, the Real, is driving directly for Ali Pasha's flagship, the Sultana. This is not coincidence. Don John made this decision deliberately the night before. The Ottoman fleet's cohesion depends on its commander. Eliminate the commander and the fleet loses its coordination. Lose coordination against a well-organized enemy and the rout follows quickly. The problem is that Ali Pasha has the same idea. Both flagships are accelerating toward each other. Both commanders understand that the center of this battle will be decided by what happens when two flagships collide at ramming speed. Both have hundreds of elite soldiers on deck. Both have cannon at the prow firing as fast as the crews can reload. Both commanders are standing at the front of their ships, visible to their men, refusing to show anything except absolute certainty. They close the distance in minutes. The impact when the Real and the Sultana make contact shakes both ships to their keels. The prows lock together. The grappling hooks fly. The lines draw taut. The two ships are now one connected structure in the middle of the Mediterranean, and the 400 soldiers on both decks climb over the railings and begin killing each other at arm's reach. This is the part the history books treat as a footnote. It was not a footnote. It was 30 minutes of hand-to-hand combat on a locked pair of ships while the entire battle raged on both sides of them. Don John fought on deck. He was wounded in the foot by a sword. He kept fighting. Ali Pasha commanded from the Sultana's deck, directing the boarding action, watching Christian soldiers push onto his ship and pushing his own men forward to drive them back. The Ottoman soldiers board the Real twice. Twice they are driven back. On the third attempt, the Christian soldiers on the Real break the Ottoman advance and board the Sultana in force. This is where it turns. Ali Pasha is on his own deck when a Spanish soldier shoots him in the head. He dies instantly. The soldier who killed him does not know who he has killed. He sees an enemy commander in elaborate dress. He fires. He then cuts off the dead man's head, because that is what soldiers do in the chaos of a boarding action when they have no time to verify what they have taken. He carries the head to Don John's flagship. Don John recognizes Ali Pasha. He orders the head mounted on a pike at the top of the Sultana's mast, the highest visible point on the ship, visible across 2 miles of open water. The Ottoman center sees its commander's head on a pike above their own flagship. It breaks in 20 minutes. But that is not where the battle ends. Because on the southern flank, something is happening that threatens to erase everything the center just accomplished. Ulus Ali has not charged. While the Ottoman right and center drove forward into the Christian line, Ulus Ali held back his 63 galleys. He watched. He waited. He looked for the gap. He is the best tactical naval mind in the Ottoman fleet. He has been fighting at sea for 40 years. He knows that a gap always opens in a long battle line. The question is where. He finds it on the Christian right flank. The Christian right is commanded by Gian Andrea Doria, the same Genoese admiral who spent 2 months arguing with the Venetians in Messina. Doria is cautious. He is more cautious than the situation requires. He extends his line south to prevent Ulugeli from outflanking him. In doing so, he opens a gap between his right flank and the Christian center. It is not a large gap, perhaps 200 yards of open water between the end of Doria's line and Don John's center formation. Ulugeli sees it immediately. He drives 63 galleys directly through the gap at maximum speed. He punches into the rear of the Christian line. He takes the flagship of the Knights of Malta. He captures its battle standard, the greatest naval trophy of the engagement. For approximately 30 minutes, the Christian right flank is collapsing. If Ulugh Ali had held his entire fleet in reserve, not just 63 galleys, he would have won the southern flank outright. He would have taken the rear of the Christian formation. He would have reversed the battle while the center was still being decided. He did not have enough ships left to complete what he started. The galleasses had already destroyed too many of them before the main lines made contact. Don John sees the crisis on his right. He pulls ships from the center, which is already crumbling after Ali Pasha's death, and drives them south. Ulugh realizes he cannot hold what he has taken. He releases the captured Maltese flagship. He breaks contact. He escapes into open water with 35 surviving galleys, the only Ottoman commander in the battle who is not dead, captured, or broken. He is also the only Ottoman commander who fully understood what happened today. And this will matter later. But not today. At approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, the battle is over. Here is what remains. On the water, the Ottoman fleet is destroyed. 117 galleys captured. 50 sunk. 30,000 Ottoman soldiers dead, drowning, or in chains. The entire Eastern Mediterranean naval supremacy of 120 years is burning in the Gulf of Patras. 7,500 Christians are dead. 13 Christian galleys are lost. The ratio is 4-1. It is not a close battle. It is a systematic destruction. And then the Christian soldiers cut open the Ottoman hulls. Below the waterline of every captured or sinking Ottoman galley are the galley slaves. 12,000 men, chained to their oars. Some have been there for a decade. Some were soldiers once. Some were fishermen. Some were civilians grabbed from coastal villages during raids on Italian and Dalmatian shores. All of them have spent the entire battle unable to move, unable to protect themselves, rowing forward into enemy fire because the chains did not care what they rowed toward. The soldiers cut the chains. There is no record of what was said, no speech, no ceremony. The men who had been chained for 10 years walked out of the darkness into Mediterranean afternoon sunlight and were free. Some of them wept. Some of them could not stand without help. Some of them picked up the weapons of dead Ottoman soldiers and kept fighting before anyone could stop them. Each of those 12,000 men had a family somewhere on a European coastline that had assumed for years or decades they were dead. Most of those families were right. The men who came home were the exception. The men who did not come home were the rule. Lepanto freed 12,000 men in one afternoon. It also made visible for the first time what the previous century had cost. 12,000 was not the total number of Christian slaves the Ottoman fleet had used in 120 years. 12,000 was the number alive on a single October afternoon. The rest had died at the oars before October 7th existed. The deadliest part of the Ottoman naval campaign was not the battles. It was the decade between battles. And here is what no one on the water that afternoon knows yet. Ali Pasha is dead. The fleet is burned. The slaves are freed. Don John of Austria is standing on the deck of the Sultana with a wound in his foot and a dead admiral's head on a pike above him. And in Constantinople, Sultan Selim II is receiving a messenger who does not yet know what to say. The Ottoman Empire has 18 months to respond, and it has never in its history failed to respond. What happens next will determine whether October 7th, 1571, is a turning point, or just a pause. October 19th, 1571. Venice. The news arrives 12 days after the battle. A galley enters the lagoon flying captured Ottoman battle standards from its mast. The crew is shouting before they reach the dock. Within an hour, the news is in every street in the city. Within 2 hours, the church bells of Venice begin ringing. Every church in the city, simultaneously. The sound carries across the lagoon for miles. Venice has not heard its bells ring for victory in 40 years. The celebrations last 3 days. People who have not left their houses since the siege of Cyprus destroyed their trade routes pour into the squares. Men who lost brothers and sons and fathers to the Ottoman advance on Cyprus weep in public. The Senate votes emergency payments to the returning fleet. The Doge declares a festival. The artists begin painting immediately. Tintoretto, Veronese, Titian. Every major painter in Venice turns to Lepanto within weeks. The same scene plays out across Europe over the following days. Rome rings its bells. Madrid rings its bells. Pope Pius V, who is barely sleeping, barely eating, who has been dying slowly for months, while trying to hold an alliance together with letters and prayers, reportedly weeps for an hour when the news reaches him. He is dead within 8 months. He will not live to see what happens next. But here is what they are all celebrating. And here is what they are all about to miss. On October 19th in Constantinople, Sultan Selim II is also receiving news. He is in his private apartments. His Grand Vizier, Sakalu Mem Pasha, is with him. The Grand Vizier is one of the most capable administrators in Ottoman history. He is also brutally clear-eyed about what has just happened and what it actually means. A Venetian ambassador is brought in to hear the Ottoman response. The Grand Vizier looks at the ambassador and says this: "In wresting Cyprus from you, we have cut off one of your arms. By defeating our fleet, you have only shaved our beard. An arm once cut off will not grow again, but a shaved beard grows back thicker than before." He is not wrong. And the Christians celebrating in Venice have no idea how precisely correct he is. This is the part they don't talk about. The Ottoman Empire enters November 1571 with the largest and most capable shipbuilding infrastructure in the world. Every major port from Alexandria to the Dardanelles has dry docks, timber reserves, and trained workers. The empire taxes 100 million people across 3 continents. It has the treasury depth to commission, build, and man a replacement fleet without borrowing a single coin from foreign banks. The Christians need a committee vote and 6 months of argument to repair 10 ships. The Ottomans begin building immediately. They do not hold a ceremony. They do not mourn publicly. Sultan Selim too walks into his shipyards in November and orders the program started. The Grand Vizier allocates the resources. The shipwrights begin cutting timber. By the spring of 1572, the Ottoman fleet has 150 new galleys in the water. Not rebuilt, new. Larger than the ones destroyed at Lepanto. Better armed. Within 18 months of the battle, the Ottomans have a fleet of 250 ships again. The same number that sailed into the Gulf of Patras on October 7th, 1571. Victory was shared. The consequences were not. In Rome, the Pope is dying. In Venice, the merchants are calculating. And in Madrid, King Philip II is looking at his finances and deciding that the Mediterranean campaign has achieved its objective. The Ottoman advance has been halted. Cyprus is lost forever, but the Italian coast is safe. Spain has other wars. There are Protestant rebellions in the northern Netherlands that are costing more money and more soldiers than any Ottoman campaign. Philip turns his attention north. And Venice, alone now, facing an Ottoman fleet that has just replaced everything it lost, facing an empire that did not pause for a single sailing season before rebuilding, makes the calculation that every merchant republic eventually makes. The math has changed. Fighting costs money. Trading makes money. The Ottomans want to trade. They always wanted to trade. The negotiations begin in secret. Again, but this time they finish. On March 7th, 1573, Venice signs a separate peace with the Ottoman Empire. The terms are specific. Venice surrenders Cyprus permanently. Venice pays a war indemnity of 300,000 ducats. Venice agrees to increase tribute payments for trading rights in the eastern Mediterranean. In exchange, the Ottomans agreed to stop raiding Venetian territory. 15 months after the greatest Christian naval victory in 100 years, Venice pays the Ottoman Empire for the right to exist in the sea where that victory was won. The Holy League that took 3 years to build and cost the lives of 7,500 men collapsed in 15 months. This is the part history remembers as a footnote. It should not be a footnote. It is the central lesson of the entire story. The Ottoman Empire did not lose at Lepanto because it was weak. It lost because it encountered a technology it had not seen and a formation it had no doctrine for. It identified those gaps immediately. It rebuilt. It returned. The structural power of the empire was unchanged. The Christian alliance lost its coherence the moment the immediate threat appeared to recede. Not because the Christians were cowardly, because coalitions built on shared fear dissolve when the fear becomes manageable. Spain needed Venice against the Ottomans. Spain and Venice needed each other against no one else. The moment the Ottoman fleet was no longer in Italian coastal waters, Spain and Venice were rivals again. They had always been rivals. Lepanto was a parenthesis. An empire that rebuilds in 18 months will always outlast an alliance that collapses in 15. And it gets worse. Don John of Austria is not finished. He is 25 years old. He believes Lepanto was the opening move, not the conclusion. He has plans. He wants to press the advantage while the Ottoman fleet is still rebuilding. He proposes an attack on Ottoman positions in North Africa. He proposes the liberation of Tunis. He writes letter after letter to King Philip II, laying out the strategic case. Philip does not respond quickly. Philip never responds quickly. Don John acts anyway. In October 1573, 2 years after Lepanto, he takes a Spanish fleet to Tunis and captures it. He installs a client ruler. He writes to Philip describing his vision of a Christian kingdom in North Africa, a permanent base from which to press the Ottoman Empire's southern flank. He is 27 years old, and he believes he is building something permanent. Philip reads the letter and does nothing. In August 1574, the Ottomans return to Tunis with a fleet of 300 galleys and 40,000 soldiers. They retake the city in a single campaign. They dismantle every fortification Don John built. They execute the client ruler. They restore full Ottoman control. Don John's North African kingdom lasts 11 months. He spends the next 4 years trying to find another campaign worthy of the victory he believes he won at Lepanto. Philip sends him to the Netherlands to suppress the Dutch Protestant rebellion. This is not what Don John wanted. This is not a crusade. This is a colonial police action in a cold northern country against Protestant merchants who have no interest in naval battles and no fear of the name Lepanto. He dies there, October 1st, 1578. The Netherlands. He is 31 years old. Some accounts say 33. The cause is typhus. He is in a military camp outside Namur, having accomplished nothing in the Netherlands that will last, having failed to capitalize on the victory that was supposed to define his century. He dies having spent his entire adult life preparing for a war he won once at the age of 24 and was never permitted to finish. And this is the part that has no monument. The 12,000 men freed from Ottoman galleys on October 7th, 1571. The men who walked out of the darkness into afternoon sunlight on the Gulf of Patras. The men who had been chained for 10 years and were suddenly standing on the deck of a captured ship with their chains cut. Most of them had homes somewhere. Coastal villages in Italy, Spain, Greece, Dalmatia. They made their way back over the following weeks and months. The journey took some of them 3 months. Some of them arrived home to find their village had been raided again in the years they were gone. Some arrived home to find their families dead. Some found their families alive, who had spent a decade assuming they were dead. Some of the men who made it home were re-enslaved within a decade, because the Ottoman raid program continued after Lepanto. Not at the same scale as before, not with the same impunity, but it continued. The coastal villages of the Adriatic and the Tyrrhenian Sea were raided through the 1580s and 1590s. The men taken in those raids were chained to oars in the rebuilt Ottoman fleet. The cycle that Lepanto was supposed to break did not break. It slowed. It changed shape. It continued. The men freed at Lepanto were the exception in a century of the rule. And the rule did not stop the morning after the battle. But this is where the Grand Vizier was wrong. Not about the beard. The beard grew back. The fleet was rebuilt. Tunis was retaken. Venice signed its separate peace. Don John died in a field in the Netherlands. By every material measure, the Ottoman Empire had survived Lepanto without strategic damage. But something else had broken. Something that timber and ducats and shipyards cannot rebuild. For 120 years, the Ottoman naval commanders had operated inside a specific certainty. The certainty that the Christians would not fight. That when faced with the Ottoman fleet at full strength, the calculation would always favor negotiation over battle. That the psychological weight of 120 years of Ottoman victories would do half the tactical work before the first cannon fired. October 7th, 1571, ended that certainty permanently. Not because the Christians won, because the calculation proved wrong. An empire that has been correct for 120 years develops a specific kind of blindness. It stops modeling the possibility of a different outcome. It stops asking whether this battle, this fleet, this formation might be different from all the previous ones. It stops preparing for the thing it has never encountered. The Ottoman fleet rebuilt its ships in 18 months. It could not rebuild that certainty, because certainty of that kind is not constructed from timber and iron. It is constructed from an unbroken record. And the record was broken on October 7th, 1571, and could not be made unbroken by building new galleys. Ulugh Ali, the only Ottoman commander who survived the battle with his fleet partially intact, understood this immediately. He told the Sultan within weeks of returning to Constantinople that the battle was lost, not because of numbers. It was lost because of surprise. The galleasses, the cutbeaks, the wind, the preparation the Christians had done in the dark the night before. He told the Sultan that if the Ottomans rebuilt the same fleet using the same doctrine against an enemy that had now adapted its weapons and tactics, the outcome might be different. He recommended they study the Christian cannon design. He recommended they adopt the galleass. He recommended they change the structure of their battle formations. He was the only commander who came back with lessons instead of excuses. He was correct about almost everything, and the Ottoman Empire listened to him, partially, for a while. But an empire that has been expanding for 120 years does not change its doctrine in one generation. The institutional memory is too deep. The commanders who grew up on the old victories are still in command. The systems that produced the old fleet are still producing the new one. Change at that scale requires a kind of pressure that one lost battle, however decisive, does not generate. That pressure would take another century to build, and when it finally arrived, it would not come from the Mediterranean. It would come from the north and the east, and the internal fractures that 120 years of expansion had been papering over without resolving. Lepanto did not break the Ottoman Empire. It cracked the foundation. And cracks do not announce themselves. They simply grow. Don John knew none of this. He died in a muddy field in the Netherlands, having won the most significant naval battle in Mediterranean history, and spent the rest of his short life watching everything he won slip through his fingers, because the alliance that won it dissolved before he could use the victory. He was the sword that was used once and then put away. The war he thought he was fighting was not over. It was not even the same war anymore. And somewhere in the rebuilt Ottoman fleet sailing out of Constantinople in 1572, there were new oarsmen chained below the waterline. Some of them had been free men a year earlier. Some of them had families who were right now on a European coastline, assuming they were safe. They were not safe. They had never been safe. The battle had changed the odds. It had not changed the math. The story of Lepanto is not about a naval battle. It never was. Naval battles happen. Fleets are destroyed. New fleets are built. The sea stays the same sea after the last galley sinks. The geography does not change. The populations living beside it do not change. The pressures that drive empires to expand and alliances to fragment and coastal villages to burn do not change. What changes is the belief about who controls the water. And beliefs are not made of wood and iron. You cannot rebuild a belief in 18 months. You cannot tax 100 million people and commission a replacement certainty from a shipyard. This is what Lepanto did, not what it is celebrated for doing. What it actually did, it broke the Ottoman certainty. Not the Ottoman power, not the Ottoman fleet, not the Ottoman treasury or the Ottoman army or the Ottoman administrative system that ran 3 continents with mechanical efficiency. The certainty, the specific, unshakable, 120-year certainty that the Christian powers of the Mediterranean would always calculate, always hesitate, always fragment before they committed, and always eventually accept Ottoman terms rather than Ottoman canon. October 7th, 1571 proved that calculation wrong. Once, in one afternoon, at the cost of 7,500 Christian dead. And that single afternoon of being wrong cost the Ottoman Empire something that no subsequent victory could fully restore. This is where it turns. Look at what happens to the Ottoman expansion after Lepanto. Not immediately. The Grand Vizier was right that the beard grew back. The fleet was rebuilt. Tunis was retaken. Venice signed its separate peace. The Ottoman Empire raided Adriatic coastlines through the 1580s and 90s. By every material measure, the 15 years after Lepanto look almost identical to the 15 years before it. But the expansion stops accelerating. Before Lepanto, the Ottoman advance in the Mediterranean had been continuous, consistent, and compounding. Each campaign built on the last. Each new territory provided resources and strategic position for the next advance. Cyprus led to a planned advance on Crete, which led to a planned advance on Malta, which led to a planned advance on Sicily. The sequence was not ambiguous. It was documented. It was funded. It was in motion. After Lepanto, the sequence stalls. Crete is not taken in 1572. It is not taken in 1580. It is not taken for another 76 years. The Ottoman campaign for Crete begins in 1645 and takes 24 years of fighting to complete. A campaign scheduled in 1571 takes until 1669. That is not the same empire moving at the same speed. Something changed the cost-benefit calculation at the highest levels of Ottoman strategic planning. Something made each subsequent Western campaign require more justification, more resources, more deliberate commitment than the campaigns before Lepanto required. The certainty is gone, and without it, every campaign costs more than it used to. But that is not the collapse. That is just the slowing. The actual collapse comes 112 years later. September 12, 1683, Vienna. The Ottoman Empire, after renewed expansion under new leadership, has pushed deep into Central Europe. 300,000 soldiers surround the city. Fewer than 15,000 defenders remain inside. The siege has been in progress for 60 days. Vienna is running out of food, running out of ammunition, running out of time. And then the largest cavalry charge in European history destroys the Ottoman siege army in a single afternoon. 80,000 Polish and Holy Roman cavalry charge down from the Kahlenberg Ridge and break the Ottoman lines. The siege collapses in hours. The Ottoman army retreats. They never return to Central Europe. The Treaty of Karlowitz, signed in 1699, formally marks the beginning of Ottoman territorial retreat. For the first time in 250 years, the Ottoman Empire cedes territory. It does not gain. It never leads an offensive campaign of this scale again. Here is the question no one asks clearly enough. Why did it take 112 years? Lepanto was 1571. Vienna was 1683. Between those two battles, 4 generations of European coastal populations were raided. 4 generations of men were chained to Ottoman oars. 4 generations of Christian alliances formed, celebrated a tactical victory, and dissolved back into competing national interests before the structural advantage could be pressed. 4 generations. Not because the Christians lacked the military capacity to press the advantage, because they could not maintain unity beyond the immediate crisis. Lepanto produced 15 months of alliance. Vienna produced the Permanent Holy League of 1684, which held together long enough to drive a sustained counter-campaign through the following decade. The difference between 1571 and 1683 is not military technology. It is not numbers. It is not geography. It is the difference between an alliance built to fight one battle and an alliance built to fight a war. Some people fought the wars. Others paid the price for the next 100 years. And this is where the story stops being about 1571. Because every single structural element of the Lepanto story is present in the world right now. Not as metaphor, as direct operational fact. There is a dominant civilizational pressure at the peak of its psychological confidence. Expanding into territory it has been moving toward for decades, operating on the assumption that the opposition will calculate, hesitate, and ultimately accept accommodation rather than confront it directly. There are fragmented Western nations that share a civilizational inheritance, but cannot agree on a unified response. Nations that spend more time competing with each other over commercial and political advantage than they spend addressing the shared pressure they all feel, but none of them will name with full clarity. There are populations on the exposed edge of that pressure, in cities and border regions and communities that are not abstract strategic positions on a map, but places where specific families have lived for generations, who are watching the alliance above them fragment in real time and calculating whether anyone is coming. And there is the same recurring pattern that has defined every episode of this story since the 14th century. Temporary unity under immediate threat. Tactical victory. Celebration. Dissolution. Return of the pressure. Another generation pays the cost. The lesson of Lepanto is not that the West can beat expansion when it fights. The lesson is that it has done so twice, in 1571 and in 1683, and both times required a level of civilizational crisis so extreme, so undeniable, so personally catastrophic for so many people, that the competing powers had no choice left but to set aside their rivalries and fight together. The first time, it took the skin of Marcantonio Brigadon on a flagship. The second time, it took the walls of Vienna. Both times, the unity lasted exactly as long as the immediate, visible, undeniable threat required. And both times, the moment the threat appeared to recede, the alliance dissolved and the individual calculations resumed. This is not a failure of courage or intelligence or faith. This is a structural feature of how coalitions built on shared fear operate. They require continuous, visible, undeniable threat to maintain coherence. Remove the threat from view, and the shared fear that built the coalition is replaced by the competing interests that were always there underneath it. The Ottoman Empire understood this. It is why they kept the threat visible. The raid programs, the galley slaves, the public executions of captured commanders. These were not random acts of cruelty. They were strategic communications, designed to maintain precisely the level of fear that would prevent European powers from ever fully relaxing into their rivalries. Enough fear to deter resistance. Not so much fear that it forced unity. They miscalculated in 1571. They produced too much fear, too visibly, in too short a period. Brigadon's skin on a flagship did the one thing they had spent a century preventing. It forced a unified Christian fleet into existence. And here is the final thing, the thing the paintings never showed. The Ottoman Empire did not fall because of Lepanto. It did not fall because of Vienna. It fell because of what happened inside it over the following 2 centuries. The same thing that happens inside every empire that expands faster than it can institutionalize. The provincial governors who stop sending revenue to the center. The military corps that becomes a political faction instead of a fighting one. The rulers who stop leading campaigns and start managing court politics. The reformers who see the problems clearly and are removed before they can fix them. The Ottoman Empire fell from within, slowly, over 200 years. The last Ottoman Sultan was deposed in 1922, 350 years after Lepanto. Lepanto did not end the Ottoman Empire. It cracked the foundation of the belief that sustained it. And cracks grow slowly in the dark, where no one can see them until the structure fails all at once. History books celebrate the battles. The battles are visible. They have dates and names and body counts and captured standards. They make good paintings. Titian painted Lepanto. Tintoretto painted Lepanto. Every major artist in Venice turned to it within 5 years of the battle. No one painted the 15 months before the alliance dissolved. No one painted the Venetian ambassador signing the separate peace in Constantinople in 1573. No one painted the families on the Adriatic coast raided in 1575, 4 years after the greatest Christian naval victory in a century, by the rebuilt Ottoman fleet that was never supposed to exist again. Because what fails slowly and invisibly does not make a good painting. It makes a warning. And warnings have this specific, reliable, historical property. They are understood perfectly by the generation that comes after the people who needed them. Marcantonio Brigadon understood what was coming in 1570. He held Famagusta for 11 months to buy time for people who used that time to argue in Rome about who would pay for the fleet. Miguel de Cervantes understood what it cost. He stood on a deck with a fever and took 3 shots and lost his left hand to fight a battle that a committee almost prevented from happening. Don John of Austria understood what the victory required and spent 7 years watching it squandered in slow motion before he died in a field in the Netherlands at 31. They all understood. They paid with their bodies and their lives and their futures. And the alliance dissolved in 15 months anyway. The pattern does not break because individuals understand it. The pattern breaks when institutions are built specifically to outlast the crisis that created them. The Holy League of 1571 was not built to last. It was built to fight one battle. It did exactly what it was designed to do. The world it was built to protect needed something that would last 100 years. It got 15 months. 450 years later, The sea is different. The ships are different. The weapons are different. The names of the powers competing for influence over the populations living beside contested waters are different. The pattern is not different. A dominant civilization at peak confidence does not believe it can lose until it loses. A fractured opposition does not believe it can win until it wins. And the moment the victory is secured, the fractured opposition returns to being fractured, because that is what it is. That is what it has always been. The beard grows back. The alliance dissolves. The next generation inherits the problem the previous generation thought it solved. And somewhere in that cycle, right now, in a city that does not yet know it is standing on the edge of something, the next Famagusta is waiting. The question is not whether anyone will recognize it when it comes. History already answered that question. It answered it in 1571. It answered it again in 1683. It has answered it in every generation since, in every language, on every coast, in every city that rang its bells too early and stopped watching too soon. The answer has never changed, and neither has the cost of not listening to it.